The studio hummed with the restless energy of a live broadcast. Bright white lights reflected off polished floors, the buzz of cameras filled the air, and the audience sat in nervous anticipation. They knew this wasn't just another panel discussion, it was a showdown. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the most outspoken and fiery voices in modern politics, was seated across from Senator John Kennedy, a man equally known for his blunt, folksy quips as for his refusal to be intimidated. The two had sparred from a distance for months. Clips of AOC calling Kennedy's policies outdated and cruel had circulated online, drawing cheers from her supporters. Kennedy, never one to shy away from sharp counterpunches, had dismissed her critiques with humor that often cut deeper than direct insults. Tonight, however, there would be no safe distance. There would be no screens to shield them, no carefully edited soundbites. Tonight, it was face-to-face, live, and unscripted. The moderator, trying to maintain a neutral tone, posed a simple question: what is the single biggest failure of the Senate in addressing the needs of ordinary Americans today? It was meant to set the stage for a broad conversation. But AOC didn't hesitate to go straight for the jugular. Senator Kennedy, she began, leaning forward, her voice sharp and unwavering, your entire political career is a joke. And I don't mean that as a casual insult. I mean that seriously. While people are struggling to pay their rent, while young people are drowning in debt, while families can't afford basic healthcare, you sit back, crack one-liners, and shrug it all off. You treat real suffering like it's part of some comedy act. Gasps rippled through the audience. Some in the crowd stifled nervous laughter, others exchanged wide-eyed glances. Even the moderator blinked, caught off guard by the bluntness of the attack. AOC wasn't finished. You've become a caricature, she pressed on, her tone rising. Every time someone asks you about climate change, you dodge. Every time someone raises the issue of workers being underpaid, you pivot with a joke. And maybe that entertains your base, Senator, but for the millions of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, it's not funny. It's insulting. Her words hung in the air like a slap. The young congresswoman sat back slightly, her lips curling into a half smile. She was confident. This was the moment she had prepared for. She had data, statistics, and righteous anger on her side. More importantly, she had struck first, and in the brutal world of televised debate, striking first often meant shaping the narrative. Reporters scribbled frantically in their notebooks. Producers in the control booth gestured to one another, sensing they had a viral clip in the making. On Twitter, hashtags were already beginning to trend as viewers at home clipped the fiery exchange and shared it with captions like, AOC destroys Kennedy live. Yet in the center of the storm sat Senator John Kennedy, unmoved. His expression didn't shift into anger or defensiveness. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing with the patience of a man who had seen this kind of political theater before. Kennedy was a man of timing, of measured strikes. He didn't rush his words, and he certainly didn't let himself be baited by the first punch. He slowly leaned back in his chair, one hand resting lightly on the table, the other folded in his lap. The cameras caught his stillness, his calm demeanor in contrast to AOC's fiery energy. That contrast alone was striking. The silence stretched. Seconds ticked by, but in the high-stakes tension of live TV, it felt like minutes. The audience, sensing that Kennedy's response was coming, leaned forward in their seats. The moderator glanced nervously between them, uncertain whether to intervene or let the drama play out. AOC, for all her confidence, shifted slightly in her chair. She had expected him to fire back immediately, to meet her heat with equal force. Instead, Kennedy's silence unsettled her. It wasn't the silence of defeat, it was the silence of calculation. Finally, Kennedy adjusted his microphone, clearing his throat softly. The sound echoed in the otherwise hushed room. His eyes never left AOC's, steady and unwavering, as though he were studying not just her words but the emotion behind them. The congresswoman raised her chin, ready to defend herself against whatever counter he might muster. She had faced critics before, older, seasoned politicians who dismissed her as inexperienced or naive. But Kennedy was different. He had a reputation for his sharp, homespun humor, the kind that often left opponents flustered and audiences roaring with laughter. Still, AOC believed she had him cornered. To her, his folksy style was nothing more than a mask for outdated policies. Tonight, she wanted to peel back that mask and reveal him as ineffective, as irrelevant. Her supporters in the crowd began to clap softly, trying to punctuate her point. But Kennedy remained perfectly still, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He was waiting, letting the tension build to the breaking point. And in that moment, it became clear to everyone watching that his silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. The congresswoman had landed her blow, but the room now belonged to Kennedy. The audience knew it. The moderator knew it. Even AOC, though unwilling to admit it, could sense it. When his reply finally came, it would either be devastating or legendary. And as the cameras zoomed in, capturing the flicker of amusement in his eyes, the nation braced for the comeback they all knew was coming. The seconds after Kennedy's sharp comeback stretched into an almost unbearable stillness, the kind of silence that only comes when a room full of people is trying to process what just happened. The cameras zoomed in on the two political figures, their contrasting expressions magnified for millions of viewers across the country. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez shifted in her seat, her usual confidence momentarily shaken. She wasn't someone who lost debates often, her quick tongue and sharp intellect usually gave her the upper hand. But Kennedy's words had cut deeper than the playful sparring she was used to. He hadn't just insulted her, he had reframed the entire moment, turning her jab into evidence against her. The crowd's reaction made it worse. Kennedy leaned forward now, sensing his advantage. His southern drawl rolled across the room with a deliberate calm that made every word sting just a little more. Now, I'm not saying you don't care, Congresswoman, he said, his voice almost fatherly. I believe you care very much. But caring isn't enough. Folks at home don't just need someone who can talk about problems loudly. They need someone who can solve them. And last I checked, good solutions don't come from shouting down the people you disagree with. The audience erupted again, clapping and cheering. A few in the crowd even stood up, unable to contain their approval. The host raised his hand for calm, but the noise carried on for several seconds, the moment snowballing into something larger than a television debate. It was spectacle. AOC smiled tightly, finally composing herself. With all due respect, Senator, she replied, I'd rather be accused of shouting too loud for working people than sitting quietly while powerful corporations and billionaires rob them blind. If you think being polite is the solution, then maybe the joke isn't me, it's the politics of people like you, who've had decades to fix these problems but chose not to. The audience clapped again, though not as fiercely as before. She had landed a counterpunch, but it lacked the sting of Kennedy's earlier line. He simply chuckled, tilting his head. Darlin', Kennedy said with a sly grin, I don't confuse raising your voice with raising people's wages. And if you think America's problems started and end with a few rich folks, then maybe you've been reading too many slogans and not enough history books. The studio gasped, half in shock, half in amusement. Kennedy had gone for the jugular, dismissing her as an idealist wrapped up in catchphrases rather than hard reality. The host jumped in, desperate to keep the debate from descending into chaos. Senator, Congresswoman, let's bring this back to policy specifics. But the audience wasn't interested in specifics anymore. They were glued to the drama, the battle of personalities. Kennedy had transformed what could have been another ordinary shouting match into a moment of theater, and AOC, for once, was on the back foot. She leaned forward again, determination flashing in her eyes. Senator, you can mock me all you want, but the truth is young people are tired of your kind of politics, slow, outdated, dismissive. They want leaders who will fight for them, not just sit back and smile with clever one-liners. Kennedy's reply came without hesitation, smooth and unshaken. Well, Congresswoman, I've found that when folks run out of facts, they usually fall back on two things, yelling, and talking about the future as if the present doesn't matter. My mama taught me something different. She said, son, if you want to change tomorrow, you better start by respecting today. Maybe that's the lesson we've all forgotten. The words landed with the weight of finality. The crowd roared, not just in applause but with the kind of guttural energy that signaled they knew they had witnessed a defining moment. Even the host looked stunned, unsure how to steer the show forward. For AOC, it was a rare defeat, at least in the optics of that evening. She sat back, her jaw tight, offering only a thin smile as Kennedy basked in the energy of the room. She knew the clips would spread across social media within minutes, dissected endlessly, meme after meme framing Kennedy as the unshakable wit who turned her fiery insult into an opportunity to shine. But Kennedy wasn't gloating. He didn't need to. His calm demeanor, the way he had flipped the script with just a few well-placed lines, had already cemented the moment. Instead of boasting, he folded his hands and waited for the host to redirect the conversation, looking every bit like the seasoned politician who knew exactly when to speak and when to let silence do the rest. As the cameras panned across the audience, the story of the night was clear. a single exchange, a single comeback, had silenced a room and shifted the tide of an entire debate. By the time the broadcast ended, Kennedy's words were already trending across platforms. Headlines would capture the essence of it: Kennedy turns AOC's insult into a masterclass comeback. Commentators on both sides would analyze it, some praising Kennedy's composure, others defending AOC's passion. But no one could deny the simple fact: in that studio, on that night, John Kennedy had left the room speechless.